This is Intelligence Matters.
I'm host Michael Allen with Beacon Global Strategies. Today, I'm joined by Mark Montgomery, the Senior Director of the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation and a Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. In addition to his 32-year career in the Navy, Mr. Montgomery previously served as the Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and as the Policy Director of the Senate Armed Services Committee for Senator John McCain. Admiral Montgomery joins us today for a discussion on developments in the Russia-Ukraine war following the Munich Security Conference and developments in Asia. Stay with us as we talk with Admiral Mark Montgomery. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me, Michael.
So, Mark, I know you go to Ukraine quite frequently. We and our listeners would love to hear your assessment on how the war is going here in February 2025.
Well, look, I mean, Russia is certainly more on the front foot than Ukraine right now, and there's a number of reasons for that. One, the Russians are really committed right now. I mean, they've pushed hard. They're taking significant casualties, and they're pushing forward. Two, they have just an immense advantage in certain munitions like artillery. You know, people think about the North Korean assistance to Russia as like the 12,000 troops, many of whom have been killed. It's that has value, but the real value of North Korean support to Russia is 5 to 6 million rounds of artillery. That's giving them a 7 or 8 to 1 execution ratio on rounds of artillery versus 7 to 8 Russian versus 1 Ukrainian on a constant, persistent basis across the whole front lines. But then third, Ukraine is suffering from a series of shortfalls caused by, going back a year ago, Republican intransigence in Congress to fund the supplemental so that you have these gaps of deliveries that have occurred episodically over the last year. But two, we actually are just low on things. It's hard to do presidential drawdown authority on 155 when there's not a lot of 155 artillery laying around U.S. Armories. And then finally, there were restrictions throughout the Biden administration on the use of weapon systems that really meant lost opportunities for the Ukrainians to attack the Russians when they were in consolidated positions and vulnerable. So those things kind of all add up, Michael, to say that Russia's on their front foot. They're not losing important land right now, and if anything, they're gaining small increments of Ukrainian sovereign territory every few weeks.
Well, we definitely want to get into how that affects their negotiating position after the Munich Security Conference this past weekend. But let's talk just a little bit more on at what point do you think Russia began to get the upper hand? At one point, I thought the Ukrainians were making incremental progress, but now it feels like the Russians are making bite progress.
I would say coming out of the last summer, the Ukrainians have not had effective counteroffensives. They've had some unique attacks, like the foray into Kursk region of Russia, which has some value. But the reality is they've been, the axis of aggressors came together pretty effectively last summer. And this, I have to go back summer of 2023, actually. That's when you started to see Iran provide Shahed drones, North Korea provide the artillery. Both of them provide some ballistic missile support. And then finally, China economically backstopping Russia. In other words, increasing exports and imports 25 to 30%, becoming taking the gas and oil that was, being sanctioned by Europe and the United States. So as that came together, I think that strengthened Russia. We have to remember, Ukraine is truly fighting all four of these aggressor authoritarian countries in a way that even Iran, who has to fight a few, when Israel fights Iran, they have to worry about Chinese and Russian support, a little bit of North Korean. Nothing compares to what Ukraine's been going through. So from my point of view, it's as the axis of aggressors coalesced, that's when Ukraine started to get on the back foot. mostly because our assistance to them wasn't as consistent and guilt-free as the aggressor. What I mean by that is, we put limitations on how they can use weapons for fear of escalating. There's no limitations on Russian use of Shahed or Russian use of North Korean artillery.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We talk so much about the Axis, and this might be just the first tangible example of all four of them working in concert. Mark, I wonder if you might also walk us through just briefly. We've heard so much about the sanctions on Russia, but they seem to be, as you mentioned, getting a lot of assistance from China. They don't seem to be having a short-term effect. I keep reading, one day they're going to bite on medium-term or long-term economic growth, but how should we think about that?
So I think that the sanctions, there's some immediate effects where, Europe would not buy oil or natural gas, but Russia's found alternative suppliers. They've found people who will purchase it. I think we've done a poor job of enforcing sanctions on the Russian shadow fleet. And what I mean by that, it's not primary sanctions on the ships themselves, but secondary sanctions on ports or companies or refineries that accept this Russian oil and natural gas. I think we can do a more aggressive job on that. I think we're starting to see a little bit of that. Look, if we really want to pressure Vladimir Putin, it's make his oil and natural gas harder to sell, whether it's to China, to India, to others. Hold other people accountable who want to do trade, who want to live in the the world of SWIFT and American financial systems. Hold them accountable so that they don't accept the Russian oil and natural gas. That's key. I worked for Senator McCain, and he used to refer to something along the lines of, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a nation state, right? I mean, they really are. The amount of governmental funds that are generated by the extraction of resources, oil and natural, and transit and sale of oil and natural gas is critical to the Russian economy. And at this point, Russia is spending over 40% of government funds on the military, on the war. The other 60% is buying votes, right? Is keeping, pensioners and things on their side. What we want to do is give Putin a strategic dilemma where his resources, his finances go down so far that he has to choose between funding the war or funding his autocratic, the ligature of his autocratic state. If we could do that, that's real pressure. That's the kind of pressure, autocrats feel. And is my credibility as a leader of this group at risk, or is my warfighting mechanism at risk? If we do that strategic dilemma, that's the Putin that you want at the negotiating table, not the kind of arrogant Putin and Lavrov we're seeing today.
All right, well, let's get to the negotiating table. This past weekend was the Munich Security Conference, an annual gathering that is a big weekend generally for the United States, reaffirming its transatlantic alliance with the Europeans. I wonder how you might score the U.S. delegation as we look back on it Tuesday morning, because it definitely seemed like there were different messages that were sent out over the weekend.
So I'm going to give them 100 on transparency for pretty much transmitting in the open every thought that went through their head. Possibly a 0 for consistency, because what that transparent message is changed over time. Look, I think there's some fair. I don't agree with what the Trump administration is doing, but I appreciate the fact they're telling the Europeans right to their face what we don't like about you. You have to if you're the Europeans, you need to appreciate that. If you're Zelensky, you need to know where you sit. Therefore they can take their action. To what degree is Europe going to get its act together, to become the primary security guarantor for Ukraine? There is no doubt that at the end of whatever these negotiations are, Europe is going to displace the United States as the principal security guarantor of a free and open Ukraine. And you could not have left that Munich Security Conference without knowing that.
Yeah.
J.D. Vance's other discussion, Vice President Vance's other discussion of, the role of the First Amendment or freedom of speech in Germany is, probably, Munich is probably a misplaced locale for that, right? You know what I mean? You want to do that discussion because Munich's a security conference, and that was really getting into domestic politics and some like 70-year-long issues in Germany about, suppression of certain types of speech, associated with fascist regimes and things. So I think that was out of step. But the rest of what Vice President Vance said was direct on, and certainly what after you translate through two different iterations, what Secretary Hegseth was saying was good for them to hear. I imagine they heard it in the contact group meetings as well that preceded it at Ramstein, where the Europeans and the United States who are contributing to Ukraine got together.
So, Mark, you've been in Europe a lot. You've helped the Ukrainians. What is Europe's problem, at least Western Europe's problem? I know some of them are spending more, but the threat picture couldn't be more stark, and I don't feel like they are spending or doing as much as they ought to be doing.
Yeah, so first, they do need to spend more. I mean, we had something, as you probably recall well, when as President Clinton took office and, the wall had fallen, the peace dividend, right, was going to be, and we certainly dropped our defense spending from the historical 4.5% to 5% down to about 3.5% of GDP. The Europeans took the peace dividend seriously. I mean, they dropped all the way down, to 1.5% over time, as an average across these European countries. So first of all, they really have underinvested in a way that is structurally unsound for rebuilding a military once you decide to invest. And so, they've got real challenges. Number two, so it's not just the 2% or 3% or 5%, whatever you say the GDP spending. It's not just the dollars. It's how you spend them. And we still have a problem that we have 32 nation states building militaries. This would be like if we said the U.S. Army is a conflagration of the 50 National Guards. That would be a cluster. It's a cluster when we just bring 1 or 2 National Guards into the regular Army, alongside regular Army units. They figure it out. But that's not how we do things. We get real advantage from the 50 states giving their money to the federal government, who then builds one military force for us. And I would never describe the U.S. military as efficient, but compared to NATO, we're efficient, right? We don't need. They don't have 32 boutique armies and 32 boutique navies and 32 boutique air forces. A lot of these small countries have finally given them up, but not everyone who should has given them up. So we're building some air forces at too small a level, some navies at too small a level. Almost everyone needs an army. I'll say, maybe not Iceland, but the rest of them in NATO. So there's a lack of efficiency, and then finally, even though the NATO's tried hard with a thing called capability targets, where you sign up that I'll provide some air defense, each country's ability to establish the readiness levels that are required with those capabilities, it's hard. And your NATO capability target competes with some national feeling of what we should do. That really is felt like with the larger ones, like the French, the British, the Germans. I mean, the French and British spend a chunk of their money on on very expensive nuclear deterrents that are really not necessary. But as a national issue, they want them, so they're going to have them. So it's not just that do you spend 2, 3, or 5%. It's do you spend it in a way that maximizes the efficiency for NATO? And the answer to that question is no. So that's why I think they're in trouble.
Yeah, okay. So President Trump is fond of saying he's the art of the deal type of official. He understands leverage. And for so long, the question was, what leverage are we going to put on Ukraine to get them to come to the negotiating table? But if Russia is making incremental progress and feels like they have the high hand right now, it really strikes me that we need to be able to put more leverage on Putin, not just to come to the table, but to be serious there. What's your prognostication of how these early talks are going here? Probably, and we'll hear later about Saudi Arabia, but what do you think of the opening gambit?
So look, I would have waited for these first talks. I would have done 3 or 4 months of real pressure, right? And that pressure involves what I mentioned earlier, the economic pressure. But it also involves saying, look, Russia, you have a dilemma as well. We all know, we're all hearing about the Ukrainian personnel dilemma that, they've lost 43,000 people dead. They've lost several 100,000 dead or seriously injured. They're slowly drafting younger and younger men to go fight, and they're struggling to get the numbers. We have it. We understand they have a problem. Russia has a problem as well. So when you talk about a pressure campaign, telling Vladimir, first doing the economic, but then second, telling Vladimir Putin, we are willing to loan, here are loan assistance programs we have in the ready to go for Ukraine. I would have done them up, sent them over to Congress. They may or may not be actually passed and authorized. That's not relevant. Putin needs to see Trump's willing to do it, that he'll do the Lindsey Graham $60 billion loan program. If the collateral is, critical, rare earth elements or strategic minerals, that's fine, whatever it is. But a loan program, and so Putin has to look at it and go, oh, geez. Now they're keeping Ukraine going for another year, and he knows inside Russia that he's used up all the minority youth he could find, Russian ethnic minorities. He's used up his prisoners. He's now starting to draft 18 and 19-year-old Slavic kids from west of the Urals, the St. Petersburg, Moscow area. That's risky. I lived in the Soviet Union in the early 1980s, and my dad was the defense attaché, and I watched, the kids around me, I watched the Soviet system shudder under the combat casualties from Afghanistan and the reflexive response from the mothers and wives and family members of those casualties. And that is something Vladimir Putin doesn't want to re-experience in 2025, 2026. So the way you maximize pressure, according to the art of the deal, right? You want to get that best position, is bring your economic pressure to bear for 3 or 4 months, demonstrate your willingness to do the security moves for the next year, and then give them a call and say, let's meet in Jeddah or wherever, in Saudi Arabia, so that we can have a discussion. So I wouldn't have had this discussion until about May or June.
Do you think, and let me just use Kursk as an example to talk about areas that Ukraine might have an advantage, but does their incursion into Kursk give the Ukrainians any leverage whatsoever on trading territory?
It's got to give them some. I don't want to overestimate it. I could see Putin say, we're just not even going to discuss that.
Yeah.
And then he'll take it back, kinetically over time. I think there's probably some value to it. They might be able to get back some area, a little bit of room down by the on their southern coastline, to get a little bit of extra wiggle room around Odessa, or they might get something in the central area that they've lost recently. But they could. I don't want to dismiss it, but I don't want to overstate the value of it. You're dealing again by rushing into this. I don't think they've allowed the Ukrainians to maximize any advantages, the United States. And this is unnecessary. I just want to back on the previous question. President Trump is the one, he should be the patient one. Zelensky and Putin are the ones with existential threats breathing down their neck. Trump has none, but he's the one driving a speedy solution. This is, and if it's for a campaign promise, I'm sorry, this isn't why he won his campaign. It wasn't some kind of landslide, so this sense of, destiny where he has to do this rapidly. I mean, he was wrong when he said he'd settle it in day one. He was full of crap. I suspect he knew it 30 seconds after he said it. He didn't give a damn. Most of us who heard him knew he was full of crap. And, so there we go. But now executing on that, like making one day 100 days, that was a mistake. And, Trump obviously never admit to a mistake, but it's a mistake. It's not how you negotiate. And I'm assuming he was a reasonably good negotiator in his career. Someone wrote a book for him about it. He should read it again.
Yeah.
He's not maximizing his leverage.
What cards do the Ukrainians have to play? It feels like Trump is interested in critical minerals, but beyond that, what's your sense of their posture going into negotiations?
Well, one, I think Zelensky's doing the right thing, saying, a bilateral meeting between Russia and the United States is not going to solve this issue. He hasn't proxied his vote to President Trump. So number one, make that clear. Number two, do the next thing he's doing, which is work with the Europeans to rally support for a European security force in Ukraine. Trump won't be opposed to that. Putin won't like it. So it's a suboptimal way of increasing leverage. The optimal way would have been to discuss that before you go to the table and have it be a known before discussions start. But, I think Keir Starmer, the Brits have already indicated more of a willingness to do this. I think the French always have. But, kind of get to that. And then, third is keep fighting.
Yeah.
They got to keep fighting. They got to keep, putting pain to Russia. If I were them, I don't think they have a lot of remaining ATACMS. They are developing indigenous long-range UAVs that strike. I would continue striking hard into Russia, hitting refineries, hitting their economic heartbeat.
But how much longer can they go on?
Yeah, I think Trump may trade his leverage. That doesn't mean Zelensky has to trade his. And so I think I'd keep that up. Again, all of this would have been better with Trump backstopping it with his own leverage building. It's suboptimal for Ukraine to do it alone, but they can do some things.
And do you have an estimate for us? I know that we passed the supplemental here in the United States late, and I assume the Biden administration flowed as much material and equipment as they could before January 20th. Is there an estimate on how long they can hold out?
I don't think there's a great estimate on it. What I would say is stuff's still flowing. Under Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, that stuff was ordered 30 months ago, 24 months ago, 18 months ago, 60 months ago. And as I'm sure you do on other podcasts, talk about the frustration of the defense industrial base delivery process. It's delivering slowly, not even slowly. It's delivering reasonably fast. I think our industrial base countries are doing a pretty good job on the Ukraine munitions. But it's still, these were 2, 3, and 4 year orders sometimes. So there's still, I want to say, tens of billions of dollars worth of undelivered Ukraine Security Initiative funds, munitions and systems, and they're flowing. Now, they're not if Zelensky's general said, here's my number 1 through 5 top priorities, like I have them right now, that's not necessarily what's flowing in at this moment from Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. These are things that were ordered 3 and 4 years ago, or 2 and 3 years ago. But some of them are on there. There's some PDA, Presidential Drawdown Authority, that was released over, in December and January, the last $5 billion or so that is flowing there. That tends to be from that top 5 list. And that'll happen for a little bit longer. The Europeans could still provide some of them. What they really need are artillery munitions, 155, 105 millimeter rounds, some mortar rounds. And then they need air defense munitions, AMRAAMs that go in a NASAM system, Patriot, PAC-2, PAC-3 missiles that go in a Patriot system, Iris missiles that go in a SAM-T, in a French-Italian system. They need the actual munitions. And so, some of those are still going to be able to flow, but undoubtedly the 1 through 5 list is being less consistently filled, starting this February, March, and extending until this war is over, unless President Trump gets frustrated with President Putin and takes some action.
Well, if Vice President Vance said anything on Ukraine this weekend, he kept saying over and over, there's a huge munitions gap, that we don't have enough equipment and ammunition to send them. Does that sound right to you? Sounds like it's true.
Yeah, I think, first of all, let's say, if I were to look at the Patriot or AMRAAM and those air defense munitions, or the 155, 105, 120 millimeter, those are howitzer tank, artillery and tank munitions. We are owed some from our Presidential Drawdown Authority. We need to restock American. Our Eastern European allies are owed some, where they gave it and then back ordered from us. And the Ukrainians need some. So you have 3 number 1 priorities, all drawing on those systems. But I will tell you, look, we were on death's door in terms of munitions production in February of 2022. There, in an unacknowledged way, we had, in every kind of munition, whether it was for the Pacific or Europe or the Middle East, in all but 1 or 2 munitions, we had completely collapsed our munitions production bases by making munitions be a bill payer throughout the Obama, Trump, 45, and Biden administrations. Okay, so in February 2022, we recognized this and we started to rebuild. Some of them have gone okay. Some of them haven't really started. One or two are going gangbuster. One of the ones going gangbuster is 155 millimeter production. Those artillery rounds, the most important. And I mean, we've gone from producing, I would guess around 400,000 or 500,000 rounds a year, maybe even less than that in 2022, to million plus rounds a year, headed towards more. So we are going gangbuster there. So J.D. Vance is correct, although we've got some solutions on the immediate horizon in the most sensitive areas, and then kind of on the horizon in the other ones. And accidentally, we've made ourselves in a better place for the Pacific fight, because this munitions solution even affected the Pacific, that's hard to say, munitions. And so, look, I'm feeling a little, J.D. Vance is right, Vice President Vance is right, but he's not perpetually right with that assessment.
Okay, we've got more coming online. Before we go to the Pacific, here's the big question for you. Do you think overall, given everything that we've discussed, the macro conditions are set for some sort of ceasefire or peace deal, or neither?
So I think there could be a cessation of hostilities over time. That is not, that gets you to a frozen conflict, not a resolved conflict, and really just gives President Putin the opportunity to rearm and solve this thing properly, from his perspective. So I'm very worried. I'm very worried that on top of everything else, storming into this without achieving the proper leverage, that we twist Zelensky's arm into signing a suboptimal deal. I'm hoping Zelensky and the Europeans can buck up President Trump and get him towards a deal, the appropriate deal. I don't think Pete Hegseth's in any position to do that. I don't think he has any constituency in this. I think Mike Waltz knows the right answer. I don't know that he's going to be willing to risk his position to kind of straighten the president out. Vance isn't going to be helpful. The guy who really understands this best of all, General Kellogg, hopefully Keith Kellogg, I hope he can convince the president to do the right thing. But I think the strongest position will be Zelensky not giving his proxy to this solution, and then working with the Europeans to kind of, get a better deal in there. So do I think there could be a cessation of hostilities? Yes. Do I think it'd be one that, any of us should be comfortable with? No.
We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more of our discussion with Admiral Mark Montgomery.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
Mark, so much talk over the last couple of years has been about the knock-on effects of what happens in Europe in the Pacific theater. Can you review those arguments for us and let us know whether that's still the case?
Sure. So, I think it's interesting that the fight, there's two schools of thought here. Well, there's three or four schools of thought, but there's two main ones. There's kind of internationalists like me who think that, for the United States benefits from being the security and economic partner of choice of as many countries as possible around the world. We benefit from a free, transparent trade system that with a rules-based, that's governed by kind of our idea of what a rules-based system should look like, so that we can trade and invest around the world and continue to be the richest country in the world. I think we all understand that our $24 trillion or $28 trillion GDP, which is 23 or 24% of the world's GDP, doesn't generate from industrial production anymore. It generates from information, it generates from trade, from financing, from the movement of cultural products like movies and things like and media. A lot of things make us really wealthy. and they require access around the world. So anyone who's, when people start telling me I'm going to prioritize this or restrain that, I'm like, and there's a magic pill where we get out of the security business, but we maintain all our economic access. I didn't know the Chinese and the Indians and the Russians were so altruistic, but if they are, and I'm wrong, then I'm excited to live in that world. But I'll live in the real world that says, hey, we got to be the security and economic partner of choice. If we want to be the economic partner of choice, we want to have that access, if we want to continue to be rich Americans, then we better guarantee that system of operation through security efforts. Okay. So then when you look at the Pacific now and you look at Ukraine, people like me say, hey, if you want people to continue to believe that you're their security partner of choice, you can't walk away from a country like Ukraine like you walked away from Afghanistan. Every Republican is happy to, dance in a circle and scream about how poorly the Biden administration handled the decision-making in Afghanistan, both the decision to withdraw and then the way they executed it and the way they treated their allies and partners. But then they half of them put on little night blinders and say, but don't worry, we can walk away from Ukraine and it'll go all right. I'm sorry. We're at the point now where we're going to be held accountable for how we treat allies and partners. You can't be the economic and security partner of choice of Southeast Asian or Northeast Asian countries when they observe you screw Afghanistan up, then screw Ukraine up, and then come and say, but don't worry, we were always just prioritizing the Pacific. So that gets you to, besides internationals like me, there's prioritizers, people who say, I prioritize the Pacific over all else. Bridge Colby has on occasion argued that, as have others who are going into the administration. Now there's another group called restrainers who go even further and say, hey, I don't want to be part of, and even the Pacific, kind of getting overly engaged in the Pacific. Can't we just find a consensual way to work things out with China? I sometimes think prioritizers are just restrainers that haven't been confronted with their priority yet, right? Prioritizers are like, well, it's not Ukraine, it's Taiwan. Okay, let's talk about Taiwan. Then they're like, well, we don't want to get in that fight. We don't want to pay for that. So now we're restrainers. So, my kind of thought is you got the internationalists, the prioritizers, and the restrainers. And I think the only people who have this right are us internationalists, because we're the ones that are going to make sure we still have access and availability. No one's going to allow the United States in because we scream, make America great again. I mean, that doesn't get you access. What gets you access is taking actions to secure things. And one more thought, it's kind of like settling in. Matt Pottinger, who works with me over at FDD, obviously a very smart guy, former Deputy National Security Advisor in Trump 45, is worried, has talked about a reverse Teddy, kind of backing down into a Monroe Doctrine. My thought, and he doesn't advocate it. He's
explain
saying
that.
Trump may be doing it.
I saw that article, but explain it.
Yeah, it's the idea of stopping your, reducing your overseas commitments and just committing to defending the Monroe Doctrine, the Central and South America, and maximize your relationship there. So the theory here is we're going to maximize our relationship with 5% of the world's GDP. Look, I'm not an economist, but even I figured out that's not a brilliant idea, right?
Right.
So we have to keep ourselves out and about, and I hope we can have it. So we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see whether the Trump administration truly prioritizes the confrontation with China. I mean, China is confronting us. There is no doubt in China about what their goal is to displace the United States, move us out, make us not the economic and security partner of choice in the West Pacific. They lay their cards on the table, and the cards don't involve us being anywhere near North and Southeast Asia. And so we're going to have to confront them, and Taiwan's probably the place.
Here's what a prioritizer would say. Hey, that sounds great, but when you think about scarcity in the United States, our budget deficit, the limitations in the defense industrial base, we can't afford to win in 3 different theaters. So we need to do it all in Asia because it matters the most for the very reasons you just stated about the Western Pacific. What's your answer to that?
My answer is that I agree that we have to burden share more heavily in Europe. And the Israelis have already kind of stepped up and done their burden sharing for us with Iran, and done what we should have done some time ago, which is take our F-35s, which can operate relatively freely over Iran, and strike them and hold them accountable. we should be shedding some responsibility, not abandoning Ukraine. Let's just be clear. 38 to, I guess 2 times that, total of about $132 billion between security and non-security aid to Ukraine, not the $500 billion that President Trump says, which I don't know where I know he makes up numbers, but that's a pretty specific number to make up and be wrong on. The $138 billion over 3 years was not a terrifically large investment. According to, Elon Musk, he found that money in like 15 different mattresses recently, and we're going to spend 4.7 trillion on tax cuts, over the next 4 years. So I'm trying to put things in a little bit of perspective for Republicans who can can hand wave 4.7 trillion in tax cuts and then say, but God bless it, this 38 billion for Ukraine is going to break us. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. And if Republicans can't see the value in being engaged and involved throughout the world so that we can maintain our economic investment opportunities throughout the world, they need to go to visit New York City. Find out how we make money. We don't make money like in steel plants in Ohio. We make money in trade and finance and intellectual property and technology, and that requires worldwide access. And it's just, I'm sorry, the idea that we can just focus on one area and hope things work out in the others is not realistic. Or we have to constrain ourselves. Say, you know what? We're the kind of country that shouldn't be 28 trillion in GDP. We should be 15. And we should have a lot less, money to go around and everything will be all right. I've never heard that argument. But, the natural extension of their argument is to constrict the U.S. economy.
So it sounds like in addition to some Asian states who might draw the wrong conclusion or the right conclusion if we quit helping Ukraine, you're also worried about us maintaining our position as the economic power of choice within Europe.
Correct.
Yeah.
We need to keep that. We need to keep, and look, I haven't said anything. I'm not saying anything negative about his, reciprocal tariffing. Maybe that's the right thing. I'm going to defer on that. I mean, he needs to get the right balance in trade with Europe. But again, I would separate the Ukrainian issue from that. The Ukrainian issue is, one, do we continue our support to the European? And it's absolutely appropriate what J.D. Vance said about the Europeans doing more for Ukraine. Again, not opposed to that. I'm opposed to walking away while we tell them to do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's nonsensical.
Okay, so over time, they fall out of the U.S. economic orbit. All right, let's go to Asia. Before we get to the big question on Taiwan and what China plans to do, let me ask one more question about the knock-on effects of Ukraine. What Asian states will think twice about allying with us or trading with us if the United States is perceived as giving up Ukraine? Like, where's this going to hurt us? Make it tangible for us.
So I think the dividing lines, I think Northeast Asia will stay with us longer. Korea, because just we're completely, interlocked with them in fighting in deterring North Korea. So the Republic of Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Australia will stay with us the longest. The ones I worry about are the Southeast Asian states, right? They're already under significant pressure, diplomatic and economic and security pressure from China. Diplomatic, there's a constant I.O. campaign about how the United States is a feckless, unreliable state. Most of our embassies spend 40% of their time countering Chinese disinformation about the United States in the host nation. They're doing economic, with the Belt and Road Initiative or Silk Road Initiative. They're trying their hardest to, jam in Chinese infrastructure and Chinese influence. And then with security, they're bullying around, particularly the Philippines, but also Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan. But the Southeast Asian ones are the ones I worry about slipping out of our economic sphere first. And these are not small countries. Indonesia's, I believe their population's exceeded ours now. Malaysia's a big country. These are big. These are developing economies. India will watch this. So all these countries begin to slip. But I worry the Southeast Asian ones, when they begin to align themselves more closely with China, that puts a ton of pressure on the Northeast Asian ones because their principal trade, if you bucket it, would be China, Southeast Asia, United States, and 2 of the 3 would then be aligned in the camp outside of us. Now, I think it's a lot to ask for Korea Japan or Taiwan to back away from us. China is not a good option. They just, China has it'll be a demanding relationship if they try to partner with them. So, but it also could drive them to look for nuclear weapons in the case of both the Republic of Korea and Japan. So these are really challenging issues for us. And so backing out, from Ukraine has a negative effect on those three, but I'd also say it has a determinative effect on the Chinese Communist Party. They think we're a weak, declining nation. Leaving Ukraine after leaving Afghanistan, and Trump can't walk away from that totally. The whole concoction of a deal with a surrender to the Taliban, and that's what it was. Don't let any other bullshit sink into that. That was a surrender to the Taliban. Maybe that was the right thing to do, but that's what Trump was negotiating. The surrender to the Taliban and the walking away from Ukraine is telling China they're right. We are a declining state. And, we got to be careful. You do not want to over-amp them and under-amp Japan, Korea, and Taiwan.
Gotcha. All right, let's move firmly now into the Pacific. I keep hearing lately that what China is doing with its planes and ships and the rest should not be thought of as military exercises, but real rehearsals for a forced unification of Taiwan with the mainland. Do you subscribe to this, and can you shed some light on it?
So yes, Admiral Paparo, the Indo-PACOM commander, has said this. So I do accept their rehearsals. They have moved beyond the just staging thing. They have built what they need, whether it's Army units that will be amphibiously or air assault moved into Taiwan. They've built the air assault helicopters. They're building the amphibious ships. They're building the weapons that go with all these guys. They're putting all the parts together for a cross-strait invasion. So the idea that these are rehearsals is right. The idea that this is the end state of this is an invasion, I'm not ready to subscribe to that. I still believe Chairman Xi's plan is to do a maximum, a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign where he squeezes the financial, energy, communication systems with political, economic attacks, cyber attacks, disinformation attacks, and then starts to sprinkle in military movements and missile closure areas and tries to break the societal resilience of Taiwan. He doesn't want a Taiwan that's been beaten up by missiles and tanks and planes. He wants a clean, that's in the middle of with some kind of like fifth element, armed element, doing an insurrection. He wants to take it on bended knee. And to do so, these rehearsals are part of that in the sense that they contribute to this campaign, this cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign of pressurizing Taiwan. I still believe that's plan one, a blockade, a full-on blockade, or a cross-strait invasion, or plans 2 and 3. They may happen, but I think this rehearsal is actually about amping up the pressure as part of plan one.
Okay, so tell us what that looks like in the end game, though. I can understand how it would be destabilizing within Taiwan, but does that mean they then say, China, let's get into talks? Does it mean the KMT wins the next election? Like, how does this actually become true?
So yes and yes. I think that's exactly what it does, is that the whole idea is to break the will of the Taiwan government and people. The government is, they eventually concede to maintain stability of, public health and safety, water, power, energy, services to the people. They say, stop. We'll enter into some kind of talks. Because if they do this right, the China, the PLA, or the CCP, the U.S. will never respond. We're terrible in the gray zone. And the only thing worse than one democracy trying to get its act together in the gray zone is 2 democracies trying to get their act together. So the idea that we in Japan or we in Australia or all 3 of us will work together to relieve that pressure during a non-kinetic campaign against Taiwan, I don't know that will be helpful if we don't think about this ahead of time. So here's Taiwan on its own, it breaks. The second element is the KMT goes, well, we've been saying, we were overreaching, we were overstating, we're the right people to kind of handle this next stage of the transition. So that's possible. So yes, and that's what it looks like. Look, Do I think it's guaranteed this will happen? No. Just like 2027 is no longer the year that there could successfully be a cross-strait invasion. We push that to the right. We get to vote. The Japanese get to vote. The Australians get to vote. And most importantly, Taiwan gets to vote. And if we all vote, we're going to take action to make this harder for the CCP. We can do it. And if we do it in concert, we can really do it. So that's kind of what I'm here in Taiwan now, and that's one of the things I'm talking to people about.
So two things. If we've moved 2027 to the right, what's, for our listeners, the new date? And then how do you increase societal resilience in Taiwan?
So, and again, 2027 is in my mind the idea of at what point on a graph does U.S. ability to prevent a cross-strait invasion, U.S. plus Taiwan plus Japan plus Australia ability, at what point is it no longer as strong as Chinese ability to take? And so we were kind of on a linear slope. You'll get a little bit better. The Chinese are on an exponential push, getting ready to pass us. Now, 2021, when Admiral Davidson said 2027, probably there should have been a comma, but we can change this. And we have. Thank you, Vladimir Putin. His war got us off our ass, and we've been buying the right munitions, doing better on this. Japan much more now sees an attack on Taiwan as an existential threat to Japan. Australia's doing more. And most importantly, the Taiwans are doing more. They're up to 2.5, 2.6% of spending on defense spending as a percentage of GDP. They're buying the right things. They're working the reserves better. They're working their whole nation resilience. So all of us are working together. I think that line now would be 2030, 2031, and it could go farther out. Now, but here's the kicker. The part where he told his forces to be ready by 2027, that's still the order in the air. Because I should mention one other thing. China's slope has slowed because of COVID and the Chinese response to COVID. So not only have we gotten better, they've gotten worse, and that's why it's out there in 2030. What Taiwan can do about their societal resilience, there are a lot of things. We've got to figure out how to get their LNG dependence more on reliable states, like delivery states like the United States and Australia, and a little less Qatar. And get them, so that they're in a position where we can easily reflag those ships and escort them in during a crisis. There are things we can do with communications, get them into Starshield, not Starlink, but the military version, the U.S. military's owned Starlink terminals, get them into Amazon Kepler, get them into all kinds of LEO and GEO communication networks, so when their cables are cut, they're okay. There's things like that we can do. We can do them left of boom, both to be more ready and to signal to China, boom ain't going to help. We're gonna recover. We're gonna get off the mat, and we're gonna be just fine because we've got our good friends, the United States, Japan, and Australia, helping us here in Taiwan.
All right. In the last few minutes that we have, let's talk a little bit about the state of Taiwan's deterrence. If I've heard anything from visiting delegations and members of Congress over the last couple of years, it's that they don't think Taiwan's ready, and they're not sure there's a plan for them to get ready. Is that your assessment?
So they are less ready than we want them to be, more ready than they were. So they're getting better. There's a plan. And I think President Tsai, who was president for the past 8 years and now President Lai for the past year, know how to execute that plan. I think they're working hard on it. They're buying much more of the right stuff. Mines, javelins. I mean, I just met with President Lai, and he literally listed every counterinvention tool a critic would have said they need to get. I mean, he's thinking about these things. They know what to do. They're worldwide production of some of these systems, like, we stopped building Stinger, shoulder-launched missiles 15 years ago. So there are some shortages that they can't just solve with the click of a snap of a finger, but they're working them. They're buying the right things. They're thinking of the right things. That's one element. Number two, they're reorganizing their military. They're getting the reserve active duty part right. Thinking about how Israel does it, how Finland does it, how Estonia does it. They're getting that right. They're training better. They're training more with us. Thank God we passed the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act of 2023. I have to give former Senator Menendez credit for that. He helped push it through. And that act in law says to the military, it's no longer, we'd really like you to do this. It's you shall train with them in the Navy and the Air Force and the Army. You shall share your war plans with them and work together. You shall do joint exercises. You shall try to bring in your allies and partners on this. So we're doing all the right things. And then finally, So you're seeing us, historically, U.S. plus Taiwan in combat would have been 2 + 2 = less than 3. We've now got it to slightly more than 3, and we're working to get it to 2 + 2 = 4, or 2 + 2 = 5. We've done this with Japan. We've done it. We've done it with Australia. We did it with the UK during the Cold War. There are certain militaries where it's 2 + 2 = 5. We need to make the Taiwans one of those militaries. There's still a lot to be done, but the people who walk away saying there's not a plan haven't talked to the right people, and the people who walk away distressed haven't seen enough of the events. It's getting better. It's not perfect. They're 1/20th the GDP of China. They're never going to fight China on their own to a victory. But what they need to do is hold them off long enough for the cavalry to come, and the cavalry is the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and all its friends.
All right, that's where I was going for our last question of the day. What does an actual cross-straits invasion look like from the Chinese? And it sounds like we're hanging in there. We want them to hang in there as long as they can to prevent a fait accompli for the U.S. Navy to arrive. But tell us what it looks like. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think first, look, I would love it. Every war game I play, the NSC's played, by the white cell, and they give me everything I want all at once, right? And I think you and I both know that's not how the National Security Council works. There's nothing that they can't ask you another follow-up question on. So we will be slow. So I don't know how slow we'll be. There's a limit to how slow we can be, but at problem start, when they do a cross-strait invasion, which is going to be both amphibious and air assault with missile strikes and quarantines or blockades, however they look at it, and they're going to be pushing Chinese forces out east of Taiwan into the Western Pacific. We're going to the Taiwans are going to have to do their best to prevent or minimize the lodgement. That is the bringing ashore of Chinese forces. That means they have to have lots of anti-ship cruise missiles, lots of drones, lots of mines, lots of javelins, all those kind of things, lots of manned portable air to take down the helicopters, all kinds of stuff to minimize the lodgement of Chinese ground forces and their ability to logistically resupply them. Then the Chinese will have air power over the island and control of the maritime outside. That's when we get involved. We and maybe the Japanese, maybe the Australians, but fighting from Japan, fighting from Guam, fighting from the sea. It is a predominantly air maritime, with air being the lead. So this is U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps aircraft, U.S. Navy ships and submarines, eating away at the Chinese forces that are east of Taiwan, rolling them back so U.S. Air Force can establish air power over the island. Once that's done, if it's done before the Chinese have gotten defeated the Taiwans, they're in trouble. Because once U.S. air power shows up, shit gets bad for our adversaries. And so, I really, is that 4 days, 7 days, 10 days, 14 days? That's how fast we are drives how long Taiwan has to hold out. In the meantime, air and naval forces are also any type of, we're starting to attack everything in the Taiwan Straits as well. But really, our submarines, which are a big asymmetric advantage, are rolling back the Taiwan naval forces east of Taiwan, so the U.S. Air Force can assume, air power over Taiwan. And this is going to involve, we should fight from Japan aggressively and force the Chinese into a strategic dilemma to attack our forces operating from the world's largest aircraft carrier, the islands of Japan. If you don't attack them, we get to use them. If you do attack them, the Japanese join the fight. I mean, that's a strategic dilemma for Xi. I love it. He needs a few of these while he's conducting this. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, there's real opportunity here, and to get this right. We have great leaders at Indo-PACOM. I think that the military is thinking about this. They're buying a lot of the right systems, not all of them. They got about 80% right on their procurement. We got to get the other. There's some munitions they need to think about and buy. There's some systems they need to think about and buy. There's some lessons from Ukraine, not all of them. Some of them that can come in and play a role here. So I'm pretty excited that we can close that 80% ready to 90 to 95. We're never going to be 100. We need to go out there and execute a kick-ass war plan with about 80 to 90% of what we need.
Admiral Montgomery, that was terrific. Thanks so much for joining us today on Intelligence Matters.
Thank you very much for having me, Michael.
That was Admiral Mark Montgomery. I'm Michael Allen. Please join us next week for another episode of Intelligence Matters.
Intelligence Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. Intelligence Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.